Welcome to the Stoic Tide. There is a kind of mind that doesn't chase validation. It doesn't raise its voice to gain control, nor does it scramble to prove its worth. It simply is calm, clear, immovable, and when it enters a room, chaos loses its grip. People pause. Conversations shift because deep down we all recognize something unnerving. This is a mind that cannot be swayed, not by praise, not by threats, not even by love. It sees through the noise without reacting to it. It listens without being. Pulled in its stillness, others begin to unravel. Not because it wants to dominate, but because it refuses to be disturbed. Most people spend their lives trying to be understood. But the Stoic path teaches something different. Understand yourself, so deeply that no misunderstanding can touch you. Train your thoughts like a warrior sharpens his blade not to harm, but to hold peace when the world loses its own. If you're someone who values clarity over chaos, depth over distraction, and inner power over outward noise, then consider subscribing as a quiet vow to yourself to walk the path of discipline, self-mastery, and unshakable peace. Most people aren't broken, they're just scattered. Their minds jump from one desire to the next, like a flame flickering in the wind, never steady, never still. One day they chase peace as if it's the answer to all their restlessness. The next they crave attention, hoping it will soothe whatever emptiness was left behind. Then comes guilt. Then comes shame. Then the desperate swing back to ambition, like maybe this time it'll give them meaning, but by nightfall they're apologizing for wanting too much, resenting themselves for not wanting enough, and wondering why life feels like it's pulling them in 1,000 directions at once. It's not that they're not capable. It's that they're not clear. Because the truth is, clarity is more rare than intelligence. Intelligence fills books, but clarity builds empires, internal ones, the kind no one can see. But everyone feels when you enter a room, the kind that doesn't need to shout or prove it, just moves with direction, calm, focused, silent. And this is the beginning of a ruthless mind. Not ruthless in cruelty, but in discipline, in subtraction, in choosing purpose over everything that clutters it. But clarity doesn't arrive like a revelation from the sky. It doesn't appear in a quote printed on your wall or a motivational video. It's forged in the fire of discomfort, in quiet moments when you finally ask yourself the question most people avoid for a lifetime. What do I actually want? Not what sounds noble, not what makes others clap, not what looks good on paper, but what burns quietly inside me when everything else goes silent. Clarity begins there, not in the answers, but in the willingness to ask uncomfortable questions. What do I truly want beyond comfort? Who must I become to deserve it? And what am I willing to release to stop being pulled in 100 directions? These questions cut deep because they threaten everything we've been conditioned to accept as success. They don't flatter the ego. They expose it, and most people will look away. But the ones who don't, the ones who stare down the contradiction of their lives, begin to feel something shifting, a stillness, a sense of direction that doesn't need external validation. And once you know what you serve, the rest of the world starts to quiet down. You're no longer driven by opinion, insult, or praise. You're no longer chasing applause or running from criticism. You're just moving one decision at a time toward something real. Seneca once wrote, "If a man knows not to which port he sails, no wind is favorable." And that's why most people feel so exhausted. It's not because they're failing. It's because they're sailing without a direction, carried by whatever gust of attention. Fear or doubt hits them next. A ruthless mind isn't reactive. It's anchored while others are swayed by moods and moments. You stay rooted in something far deeper. That route is clarity. Not the kind that needs to be constantly reaffirmed, but the kind that feels like a vow. You begin to say no. Not out of anger, but alignment. You stop explaining. Not because you're arrogant, but because your energy has become intentional. You let people misunderstand you if they must, because you're no longer performing for them. Carl Jung spoke of the unlived life that lives within all of us, the life we avoid, suppress, or deny, because it threatens the identity we've built for approval. But when you begin to seek clarity, that unlived life starts speaking louder. And if you listen, it will lead you to something rare, a sense of direction. So strong, distractions feel like static. You stop needing To prove your worth, you just start building it quietly. Brick by brick. Clarity doesn't mean you won't feel lost sometimes, but even in confusion you'll have something. Most don't orientation, you might take detours, but you won't forget where you're headed. You might be misunderstood, but you won't misplace your values. This is what separates those who drift from those who lead. Not titles, not status, but the internal compass that stays steady when the storm hits. When your mind is no longer a battlefield of conflicting desires, it becomes a weapon of focus. And that's what terrifies people. Not because you're cold, but because you're calm. In a world that feeds on chaos, you don't flinch when they provoke you. You don't chase when they ignore. You don't crumble when they withdraw approval. Why? Because clarity has made you independent from all of it. You no longer seek direction in their reaction. You've already chosen your path. Epictetus once said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal. In life it is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control." Clarity is that kind of freedom. It doesn't eliminate uncertainty, but it removes dependency. You stop waiting for signs. You become the sign. You stop asking for permission. You start acting from principle. And people will notice. They won't always understand it, but they'll feel it. The stillness, the self-containment, the refusal to be rushed or pulled or flattered into decisions that don't serve the larger vision. And here's the part that most people never realize. Clarity isn't just about direction, it's about conservation of time, of energy, of self. When you know where you're going, you don't waste energy convincing people to walk with you. You don't beg to be seen, you walk alone if you must, and in doing so you become visible in a way that noise never could. So if your mind has felt foggy, scattered, or easily pulled, ask yourself not what should I want, but what must I stop pretending I don't want. Not what's expected of me, but what's been calling me quietly for years. Let that become your compass. Let clarity become the ground you stand on when everything else shakes, because once you know where you're going, distraction loses its power. Guilt becomes irrelevant, and the noise, it fades into background. You stop performing, you stop explaining, you stop chasing, you simply move with clarity, so sharp the world starts adjusting to you. People don't fear your anger. They don't fear your love either. What they fear is not being able to predict which one you'll offer. They fear what they cannot read, because when someone can't place your emotion, they can't prepare for your next move. And that kind of uncertainty, it unravels control. Most people are walking instruction manuals, easy to decode, easy to manipulate. Praise them. They melt, criticize them, they collapse, push the right button, and you know exactly what reaction you'll get. But the moment you stop reacting on cue, everything changes. Their script breaks, their rhythm stumbles, because emotional stillness isn't passive, it's power with the volume turned all the way down. Stillness is misunderstood. Some mistake it for coldness. Others call it indifference. But true stillness, the kind that comes from an inner fortress, isn't about shutting down, it's about choosing when and how you express what you feel. The ruthless mind feels everything: rage that burns joy, that lifts pain, that cuts deep, but never lets those feelings escape recklessly. It doesn't broadcast vulnerability. It doesn't parade excitement, because once the world sees your triggers, it starts learning how to pull them. There's a reason emotional predictability is so often exploited. Manipulators, critics, even well-meaning people, if they can read you like a book, they'll start writing chapters into your life that don't belong there. Your face reacts, your tone shifts, your shoulders tense up. Every visible cue becomes a lever, and slowly you stop acting from clarity and start reacting from pressure. But the moment you become unreadable, when your calm becomes consistent, your silence becomes standard. They don't know where to press, and that's when your real power begins. Epictetus taught, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. The Stoic knows that emotion is not the enemy. Untrained emotion is, because once your emotions take the lead, your reasoning follows like a shadow. You can feel everything and still be ruled by nothing. And that's what separates strength from sensitivity. One becomes your compass, the other becomes your cage. But how do you hold stillness when everything inside you is screaming to respond? That's where discipline enters you. Practice emotional stillness the way an archer practices. Aim not by ignoring your target, but by calming the hand that draws the bow. You learn to breathe before speaking. You learn to pause before reacting. You learn to observe your emotions like waves. Not to drown in them, but to understand how they move. The goal isn't to become empty, it's to become sovereign over yourself. Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Most people walk through life being led by emotional impulses. They've never examined, they think they're being authentic, but they're just being reactive. Stillness is not suppression. It's awareness. It's looking at the storm within you and saying, I see you, but you don't steer today. It's not that you don't care, it's that you care enough to protect your response from being wasted. There's a hidden advantage to stillness. Most people never recognize it. Forces others to reveal themselves when you don't react, when you don't jump, flinch, or over-explain. People start to overcompensate. They speak more, they reveal more, they try harder to get a rise out of you. And in doing so, they expose exactly what drives them. Stillness makes them uncomfortable, because it puts a mirror in front of their insecurity. And you stay quiet, you learn, you wait. Think about the last time someone said something designed to provoke you. Maybe they questioned your worth. Maybe they dismissed your effort. And maybe they expected you to defend yourself. But what happens when you don't? When you offer silence instead of justification, they lean in, they scramble. Because now the pressure has shifted. They're not sure what you're thinking. And in their uncertainty, their control dissolves. Stillness isn't about winning every argument. It's about refusing to play games that cost you your peace when you don't give away your emotional state. You conserve your energy, you protect your center, and in a world that is always trying to pull you off balance, through news, opinions, relationships, and noise, that stillness becomes sacred. It becomes your weapon, not to attack but to outlast. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That's the root of emotional stillness, knowing that no matter what chaos surrounds you, your reaction is still yours to own. You can be misunderstood and remain grounded. You can be criticized and stay composed, because emotional stillness is not weakness. It's containment, and that makes people uneasy. They can't manipulate what they can't measure. People will call you distant. Some will say you've changed, but let them talk. You're not cold. You're conscious. You're not disconnected. You're deliberate. And the more you train yourself to sit with discomfort without expressing it recklessly, the more control you gain, not just over perception, but over your life. A calm face in a heated moment becomes a symbol. A person who refuses to be provoked becomes magnetic. The silence you hold becomes louder than their noise, and in that space you begin to control the energy of a room without raising your voice, without explaining your stance, without chasing. Understanding. Eventually people learn not because you preached, but because you practiced. They learn that your peace is not for sale, that your emotions don't leak on command, that your boundaries don't shake under pressure, and they start to adjust, not to your anger, not to your approval, but to your consistency. This is how emotional stillness becomes a weapon, not to hurt others, but to protect yourself, not to intimidate, but to insulate. In a noisy world, your silence becomes sharp. In a reactive world, your calm becomes rare, and when people can't decode you, they become cautious. That caution is power. Quiet power, stoic power. Let your stillness do the work. Let your silence carry weight. Because the strongest move you'll ever make is not reacting when you've been trained your whole life to do just that. You don't need to raise your voice to make an impact. You don't need to interrupt to argue or to prove you're right. Real influence, the kind that bends the energy of a room, comes from noticing what others miss most. People believe power lies in what you say, but true power often lies in what you see and choose not to say. Because when you see clearly, you don't need to convince anyone of anything. You simply understand what moves them, and that knowledge alone becomes leverage. Observation is not passive. It's the most underestimated form of control. While others rush to speak, to defend, to be heard, the ruthless mind listens not just to the words, but to the patterns, the pauses, the contradictions. You listen to what someone repeats too often and to what they never mention at all. You notice how their voice shifts when a name is brought up. You catch the flash of tension behind a smile the moment their eyes drop, when a topic hits too close. These are not small things. These are signals, and people are constantly leaking them, but to notice you have to slow down. And that's hard for most people, because slowing down means giving up the urge to respond, the need to be interesting, the desire to be right. It means placing your attention fully on someone else, not to impress them, but to understand them, the way a sculptor studies a block of marble before the first strike. Not with impatience, but with curiosity. That's what makes the difference between someone who speaks to be noticed and someone who sees to know. Most people live on the surface. They react to tone, to compliments, to insults, never asking why the person said what they did. But a trained observer asks, what are they trying to hide? What are they defending? What are they chasing? Because behind every reaction is a belief. Behind every story is a wound. And when you can see the shape of someone's pain without them ever saying it, you hold more power than they'll ever admit. Carl Jung once said the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But if you enter that meeting unaware, reacting emotionally, you miss the transformation. You lose the data. You show too much and learn too little. The Stoics didn't just speak of mastering emotion. They spoke of mastering perception, of understanding nature in all its forms, including human nature. What drives people, what scares them, what masks they wear just to survive. And here's the part. No one tells you people reveal the most when they think you're not looking, when your energy is quiet, when your presence is steady. That's when they start performing. That's when the real truth comes out, not through confession but through contradiction. A subtle tremble when challenged, a moment of over-explaining, a quick deflection, followed by forced laughter. These aren't accidents. These are cracks. And once you've seen them, you don't need to confront. You don't need to expose. You simply calibrate. You adjust your approach. You speak to the truth beneath the surface, not the performance on top of it. This isn't manipulation. It's alignment. You stop wasting words where they won't be received. You stop offering trust where it won't be returned, and instead you move with precision, quietly, strategically. Observation is also protection. It keeps you from walking into battles that aren't worth fighting from, forming alliances with people who wear sincerity like a costume, from handing out loyalty to those who haven't earned your silence, let alone your thoughts. Most people fall for appearances, well-practiced charm, time, generosity, the right words. But a still mind sees through it. It watches, it waits, it notices how they speak about others when they're not in the room, how they handle discomfort, whether they ask questions or just wait to talk. There is power in silence, not the awkward kind, but the intentional kind, the kind that lets someone fill the space while you study them. Let them over-explain, let them try too hard. The more they speak, the more they reveal, and the more you say nothing, the more they start to guess what you're thinking. That guessing becomes their discomfort. That silence becomes your leverage. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Most of the time we assume danger where there is none, and miss the real danger standing right in front of us, because we're too busy reacting, projecting, assuming. But the ruthless mind observes without judgment. It takes in data, not drama. It doesn't rush to decide. It lets people reveal themselves over time, and they always do. Once you become a person who observes, instead of reacts, you start to see things others miss entirely. You realize that someone's bragging is just insecurity in disguise, that someone's silence is not confidence but fear, that someone's warmth might be real or rehearsed. And instead of confronting it, you just store it. You keep the information. You let time do its work, because power isn't always in the response, it's in the restraint. Eventually people start to feel it the way you look at them, and they can't tell what you're thinking, the way you speak less, and understand more the way you don't fall for flattery or rise to insult. They begin to notice that their usual tricks don't work on you, and that realization, subtle as it is, shifts the entire dynamic. You don't have to dominate conversations. You don't have to be the loudest in the room. You just have to be the one who sees clearly. And once you are, the game changes. People don't perform the same when they feel seen. They don't lie as easily. They don't try as hard to impress, because deep down they sense the difference. They know you're not just hearing them, you're reading them. And when the moment comes to act, you don't strike blindly. You move with purpose, you speak only when needed. And when you do, your words land deeper. Not because they're louder, but because they're informed. Every sentence shaped by everything you've quietly observed. Every move made from a place of clarity. You didn't rush to play the game. You studied the board, and now you move. There's a reason guilt is the most effective tool of control, not force, not fear, but guilt. It doesn't raise its voice, it doesn't lock you in a room, it whispers. It dresses itself as kindness. It shows up sounding like your conscience, but walks like a chain. Don't be mean, don't make them feel bad. Just give them one more chance. It sounds noble until you realize you're bleeding for people who wouldn't offer you a bandage. You give again, you stay quiet again, you bend just a little more, and every time you shrink, most people don't know where their guilt comes from. It was planted in childhood, watered by repetition, and reinforced by relationships that praised compliance and punished resistance. They learned that saying no made them selfish, that walking away made them heartless, that having boundaries meant they were the problem. And so they stopped choosing for themselves, not because they lacked clarity, but because they feared what others might feel about it. They traded truth for harmony. But what kind of peace is that? If it demands your silence, guilt is not always a signal of wrongdoing. Sometimes it's a leash, one designed to make you sit quietly in someone else's comfort zone. The Stoics taught us that emotions must be examined before they're obeyed, that clarity is not found in surrendering to feelings but in questioning their source. So when guilt rises, pause, ask, is this guilt rooted in my values, or is it being used to control my behavior? Because there's a difference between a conscience and a cage. Carl Jung once said, nothing has a stronger influence on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent. Many people were raised not just by rules but by guilt, passed down like a family heirloom, not because their parents were cruel, but because they were never taught a better way. So guilt became the language of love, of discipline, of control, and that voice stayed in your head long after their voice stopped. You can't create authentic peace by constantly sacrificing yourself to avoid discomfort. That's not peace, that's people-pleasing dressed in morality, and morality without freedom is just obedience. Power begins when you stop apologizing for your boundaries, when you stop explaining why you're not available to be drained today, when you stop offering more of yourself, just to keep the room calm, because sometimes the room needs to feel the discomfort of your truth, not the illusion of your agreement. It's not about becoming cold, it's about becoming honest. If someone is hurt by your boundary, it does not mean the boundary is wrong. It means the relationship was built on your absence, and that's a relationship that needs to shift. Peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of self-respect. And if keeping the peace requires constant self-abandonment, then it's not peace, it's emotional servitude. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." But how can you be free if you're still ruled by the fear of being disliked? How can you be strong if your every decision is filtered through someone else's expectations? Guilt makes cowards of the kind-hearted. It turns strength into silence and generosity into exhaustion. And the only way to break free is to practice disappointing people who benefit from your compliance. You will disappoint them. Let that be known. They will call you selfish, cold, distant. They will say, you've changed, and you have. You've learned to ask better questions. You've learned to stand inside your own life, and in doing so you've made space for something rare. Clarity that doesn't waver under guilt. It won't feel natural at first. The first few no's might shake your voice. You might feel the echo of that old training whispering you're being cruel. But hold the line, because every time you choose what's right over what's easy, you reclaim a piece of yourself. And those who love you without condition, they will adjust. They may not like it, but they'll respect it. The ones who fall away, that was their choice, not your betrayal. And as you get clearer, as guilt loosens its grip, you'll start to notice how much quieter life becomes. Not because people stop asking, but because you no longer feel obligated to explain. You move with integrity, you choose with intention. And that's more honest than any smile forced by guilt. There's a kind of strength that comes from saying, I won't carry what isn't mine. The emotional weight, the shame, the endless fixing of what others keep breaking. You drop it not to punish but to protect, not because you've stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself too. And from that place, you don't just give less. You give better from fullness, not from fear. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, if it's not right, don't do it. If it's not true, don't say it. What if we applied that same standard to guilt? If it's not rooted in your values, don't obey it. If it's not pointing to real harm you've caused, don't carry it, because guilt has a place, but its place is not in steering your life. It's in alerting you to misalignment, not enslaving you to false obligations. The more you practice, the easier it becomes. You stop flinching when someone says you've changed. You stop defending every decision that doesn't please the crowd. You stop feeling responsible for every emotion in the room, and something beautiful happens. You grow not just in confidence, but in presence. People start to feel your center. They sense that you no longer need approval to make a move, and that calm, that quiet conviction, it shifts the room in ways your old guilt never could. So if guilt still pulls at you, pause, ask if it belongs, ask if it's earned, and if it's not, let it pass like a wave. You are not obligated to drown in what doesn't belong to you. You are not selfish for choosing peace over performance. You are not cruel for wanting space from what drains you. The moment guilt stops steering your choices, something else takes its place. Clarity, integrity, strength, and the kind of peace that doesn't depend on keeping others comfortable. A peace that finally includes you. The most unsettling person in any room isn't the loudest. It's the one who doesn't need anyone. They're not out of arrogance, not out of detachment, but because they've built a world inside themselves that doesn't collapse when others walk away. That's what makes people nervous. We live in a culture that thrives on emotional dependency, one that teaches you to equate love with approval, connection with validation, and worth with applause. But what happens when you no longer need any of it to feel whole? Most people are constantly managing the image of themselves. They think others want to. See, they chase closeness not because they're truly ready for it, but because solitude terrifies them. They seek reassurance as a substitute for self-trust. They crave closure as a stand-in for clarity. They collapse in the face of being misunderstood, as if someone else's confusion could ever change who they are. But once you begin building from the inside out, that desperation starts to die off, and something new takes its place. Containment. Self-containment isn't isolation. It's internal abundance. It means you've stopped handing people the power to decide how you feel about yourself. You don't chase texts to know you're loved. You don't beg for explanations to move on. You don't fall apart when someone pulls away because you were never leaning on them for balance in the first place. You've developed your own gravity, and now people either orbit respectfully or they drift. Stoicism teaches us to want nothing, to expect nothing, and to control only ourselves. It sounds cold at first, but it's the warmest form of freedom. Because the moment you stop expecting others to complete you, you finally start to meet yourself in full. There's a line by Marcus Aurelius that cuts deep nowhere. You can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul. That's the aim, to make your soul a place you can live without needing someone else to decorate it. We've been conditioned to believe that needing others is proof of being human. And while connection matters deeply, dependency is another story. When your entire sense of self rises and falls with someone else's attention, you're not in love, you're in captivity. Self-containment means being able to share space with someone without shrinking into them. It means being able to walk away from a conversation without replaying it 1,000 times in your head, wondering if you should have smiled more, said less, or explained yourself better. It means you live by your own rhythm, not their reactions. Carl Jung once noted that loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important. But when you're self-contained, your sense of worth doesn't shatter in the silence. You find peace even when there's no one to hear your thoughts. You find power in restraint, not as suppression, but as sovereignty. You don't have to say everything, explain everything, feel everything out loud. You simply know. And that quiet knowing becomes the foundation. No one else can shake. People will try to test it. They'll pull back to see if you chase. They'll question you to see if you'll bend. They'll offer approval to see if you crave it, but when none of it moves you, when you remain still grounded, present, that's when they begin to sense that you're different, not unreachable. just unreachable through manipulation, and that unnerves them because the usual scripts don't work anymore. Self-containment isn't about being unaffected, it's about being unshakable. You still feel, you still care, but you don't leak. You don't hand over your peace for the sake of being understood. You don't rearrange your values just to stay close to someone who doesn't value you. You learn to say, this is who I am, and I will not collapse to make you comfortable. And that clarity either draws people in deeper or sends them away, but either way you remain whole. There's something rare about someone who walks in already full, who doesn't enter a relationship hoping to be saved, who doesn't attach meaning to every compliment or criticism, who can sit with their own thoughts long enough to make decisions not from fear, but from alignment. That kind of presence is felt. It's not showy, it's not loud, but it lingers because people are used to being needed. Not many are ready to be chosen. Seneca said, associate with people who are likely to improve you. But if you're constantly trying to prove yourself to be accepted, you're not being improved, you're being emptied. And the person who truly respects your self-containment won't be intimidated by it. They'll admire it. They'll meet you with their own center, not their chaos. And together something rare is possible: connection without control to get there. Though you have to practice. You have to sit in the discomfort of not replying to every accusation you have. To hold your ground when someone says you've changed, you have to stop chasing conversations that never respected your voice to begin with. And in that stillness, you'll feel it. The return of your power. The slow but steady shift from neediness to presence, from performance to peace. There will be moments when the old patterns whisper back, when the urge to explain, to chase, to seek reassurance tries to creep in. But every time you choose to stay anchored, to breathe through the pull, you reinforce the truth. Your peace is not negotiable. Your self-worth is not outsourced, and your love, when given, is not a plea. It's a gift freely offered, never begged for. So let others come and go. Let their opinions rise and fall like the tide. You've built something within that doesn't wash away so easily, and that, more than being liked, validated, or even understood, is what sets you apart. You are not hard to love, you are just no longer easy to manipulate. And once you reach that place of quiet strength, you won't trade it again. Not for company, not for comfort, not for anyone who confuses access with entitlement, because the most terrifying thing you can become is someone who no longer needs to be held together by anyone else. You already are. Real power never introduces itself. It doesn't walk into a room and declare its presence. It doesn't announce its victories or demand recognition. It moves quietly. It arrives without noise. And yet everyone feels it. Not because of what's said, but because of what's been consistently done. That's the weight of discipline. And that's the kind of influence that doesn't just live in the moment, it lingers long after you've left. People often try to build power through image, through status symbols, through polished words, through relentless self-promotion. But image fades. Discipline remains, because when your actions align with your principles day after day without needing applause, something stronger than an impression is formed, a reputation. And the strongest reputations are built, not spoken. They're carved into the silence you hold, the boundaries you protect, the reactions you refuse to give away. It starts with the small decisions you walk away from disrespect without theatrics. Not because you're weak, but because you no longer offer your dignity as a bargaining chip. You uphold boundaries without launching into explanations. You don't yell, threaten, or over-explain. You don't negotiate your worth just to keep the peace. Each of these moments becomes a thread, and together they begin to weave something solid, an identity that speaks before you do. Carl Jung once said, you are what you do not, what you say you'll do. Most people forget that they confuse noise with influence, but the mind that leads with quiet consistency always speaks louder, because when you act with integrity, especially when no one's watching, you train the world how to perceive you. You teach people that your silence is not emptiness, but calculation. That your boundaries are not walls, but signals. That your distance is not anger, but discernment. The beauty of this kind of presence is that it doesn't need maintenance. It doesn't demand you correct every misconception or defend every decision. The people who get it, get it. The rest, let them guess. That guessing creates a space most people aren't comfortable with, It forces them to sit with the version of you they cannot control. And the more they try to fill in the gaps with their assumptions, the more they reveal about themselves, not about you. Reputation, when rooted in action, does something remarkable. It enters rooms before you do it, precedes your name. It creates gravity without effort. Someone hears you're coming, and they already adjust, not out of fear, but out of recognition. They've heard how you carry yourself, how you don't overreact, how you don't engage in gossip, how you move when disrespected, and they understand that. With you, silence is not absence, it's a message. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often, waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be one. That's how you build reputation. Not by chasing validation, but by becoming so aligned with your values that your presence makes statements. Your mouth never needs to form. You become known not by your opinions, but by your patterns, not by your promises, but by your posture. When things go wrong and people will talk, let them invent reasons for your silence. Let them speculate why you stopped responding, why you no longer attend, why you moved without announcement. Every question they ask about you is energy spent trying to decode your self-control. That's the leverage, because when your name carries the weight of discipline, you don't need to show up to prove anything. Your absence becomes just as powerful as your presence. We live in a world that over-explains, that constantly seeks to clarify, justify, and protect every decision made. But a strong reputation is protected not by defending it, but by living it, quietly, repeatedly, without compromise. And that's where most people fall short. They try to control the narrative through conversation, but narrative is best shaped through consistency, through the ability to walk away without making a scene, through the power to remain still when provoked. Seneca wrote, "It is a great thing to know the season for speech and the season for silence. Some situations don't need your voice. They need your absence. Some people don't deserve your attention. They deserve your indifference. And every time you choose not to engage with noise, you reinforce the weight of your silence. Not as punishment, but as protection. Not to hurt others, but to guard what you've built. Eventually, people stop testing you. Not because you won the argument, but because you stop showing up to play the game. They begin to associate your presence with calm clarity and consequences. They think twice before dragging you into nonsense, because they know you won't bite. You won't react. You won't break character to match. They're chaos, and when people learn they can't get a rise out of you, they stop trying to pull you down. This doesn't mean you're untouchable. It means you've become principled. And in a world where everyone wants to be liked, to be seen, to be heard, being principled stands out. You don't have to dominate conversations or post your every move. You simply become known for how you carry yourself. And that reputation travels further than any explanation ever could. Let your name mean something, not because you demanded it, but because you earned it in silence, through choices made with discipline, through boundaries kept without theatrics, through exits made without warning or revenge. That kind of reputation becomes armor, not because you're hiding behind it, but because it reflects who you've become without needing to speak a word. So let people wonder why you didn't show up. Let them ask why you didn't respond. Let them feel your absence, and try to make sense of it while they talk you build, while they guess you grow, while they debate your character. Your character continues to speak in places your voice never needs to reach, because in the end, the most powerful words aren't spoken. They're remembered, and the kind of reputation that's built on stillness, restraint, and unwavering discipline. That's not just remembered, that's respected in every interaction, whether we realize it or not. A silent battle takes place. A negotiation of tone, of direction, of control. Someone sets the frame, the other follows it. That frame decides what matters, who's on the defensive, and which voice carries weight. And most of the time, people give up that power without even knowing they had it. They jump to answer questions that were designed to trap them. They explain, over-explain, defend, correct, react, and the moment they do, they've already lost their center. The person who controls the frame doesn't need to raise their voice. They don't need to argue. They don't even need to win the conversation, because they've already chosen what the conversation is about. That's where the real leverage lives, not in domination but in direction. It's subtle, quiet, but once you understand it, everything shifts. We're conditioned to believe that defending ourselves makes us strong, that we must prove our goodness, prove our intentions, prove our right to speak. But the moment someone pulls you into a frame built on accusation, gossip, or emotional chaos, and you respond from within it, you've accepted the rules of a game you didn't design. You may win the argument, but you'll lose your power. Because strength isn't reactive, it's directive. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul, and often their words. Especially the baited ones have little to do with you, and everything to do with avoiding their own discomfort. They provoke to pull you off balance, to test your alignment, to make you dance inside a frame that validates their story. And when you refuse, when you stand still and let their assumptions fall flat, that's when control returns to you, not as dominance, but as composure." Stoicism teaches us to guard our internal world. Like a fortress, Epictetus reminded us, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. You are not responsible for what they say, but you are responsible for whether you hand them your energy, whether you let their frame become your reality. And when you stop doing that, when you choose what deserves your attention and what doesn't, you stop being pulled around like a puppet. This doesn't mean silence in the face of injustice. It means discernment. It means recognizing when an argument is a trap, when a question is bait, and when a conversation is simply noise. Some things don't deserve your words. Some people don't deserve your explanation. And when you can sit in that silence, not out of avoidance, but out of power, people start to notice. They begin to second-guess themselves because you didn't react the way they expected you to. Let someone question your motives. You don't defend, you live. Let someone lie about your actions. You don't run to correct it. You stay in integrity because the truth doesn't need rescue. It only needs consistency. You know who you are, and when that knowing becomes unshakable, the need to control perception begins to dissolve. What matters isn't what they think. It's what you become by refusing to entertain distractions. There's a quiet strength in redirection. You don't need to argue your value. You can shift the conversation back to principles, to clarity, or even into silence. Sometimes the strongest move isn't proving someone wrong. It's refusing to participate in their confusion when they insult you. Smile faintly when they accuse you. Ask what matters about that to you. Not to provoke, but to pivot. Not to outwit, but to reset the frame. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. You always own the option of having no opinion. That's power. Most overlook you don't have to join every conflict. You don't have to explain your every move. You don't have to react just because someone demands it. When you choose silence over defense, when you choose redirection over reaction, you show that you're grounded in something deeper than approval. And here's what happens when you do this. Consistently, people start to adapt to your frame. They speak more carefully. Around you, they stop testing you in petty ways. They begin to respect what they can't predict, because unpredictability, when rooted in principle, creates a kind of reverence. They don't know what will trigger you because nothing trivial does, and that changes the entire dynamic. There's no need to be aggressive. You're not trying to overpower anyone. You're simply refusing to be pulled. You're choosing which battles exist. And when you don't engage in false battles, the real ones become clearer. Your energy sharpens, your presence quiets the noise. You're not proving anything anymore. You're simply being what you are consistently enough that the room adjusts. Not because you force it, but because you frame it. And yes, people may call you distant. They may label you arrogant. Let them. Those are just words thrown by those who've lost their grip on your emotions. They used to push and watch you fall. Now they push and you stand still. That stillness speaks. It recalibrates the space, and that is frame control. You control it not by dominating, but by choosing. What do you respond to? What do you allow into your emotional field? What narrative are you living by? The answers become your compass, and they carry far more weight than your defenses ever could. Your calm becomes a boundary. Your silence becomes a mirror. And in that reflection, people are forced to see themselves more clearly, because you're no longer giving them a version of you. They can distort. So the next time you're pulled into someone's drama, someone's story, someone's emotional chaos, pause. Not everything deserves your voice. Not every frame deserves your presence. Protect your energy by deciding what you'll carry. And remember, the strongest person in the room isn't The one who wins the argument, it's the one who knows the argument isn't worth having. Because true control has never been about raising your voice. It's about raising your standard. And when you do that quietly, consistently, and without apology, everything else learns to meet you there or fall away. There's something haunting about silence, not the kind that lingers awkwardly between strangers, but the kind that comes after someone expected you to explode and you didn't. The kind of silence that follows disrespect, betrayal, manipulation, and is met not with anger, not with retaliation, but with calm. That silence says more than any outburst ever could, because it leaves space. And in that space, people start writing their own stories. They begin filling in the blanks with their guilt, their fear, their regret. They start hearing echoes of things you never said, but they know you could have when someone wrongs you. They often expect drama, they expect arguments, long texts, emotional monologues. Why? Because they want to stay in control of the narrative. They want to drag you into a theater where they still have a role. But when you remove yourself completely, not as revenge, not as a tactic, but as a decision, they're left in silence. And silence becomes a mirror, a quiet, undeniable reflection of what they did. It forces them to sit in the space they never expected you to create. This is where the art of psychological distance begins. Not as a game, but as a form of peacekeeping with yourself when someone disrespects you. Withdraw not to punish, but to protect. Not to teach them a lesson, but to honor what you already learned. They showed you something. Once you believed them, that's enough. And when they reach out, when they ask, "Are we okay?" you don't lash out. You don't explain, you simply say, "We're fine." Not as an olive branch, as closure, quiet, firm, final. That's where the power is, not in loud exits, but in quiet detachment, because nothing disorients someone more than your refusal to perform. They expected you to fight, to cry, to plead, but instead you left the stage, you gave them nothing, and in doing so, you gave them everything they didn't want. Space to think, room to remember, and a realization that your peace is no longer up for negotiation. Stoicism teaches us not to control others, but to govern ourselves. Epictetus said, "Keep your attention focused entirely on what is truly your own concern. When someone offends you, the concern isn't their behavior, it's your reaction. Will you give them your fire, or will you stay grounded in your own clarity?" Psychological distance gives you space to choose to breathe, to step back far enough to see things as they are not, through the smoke of emotion, but through the lens of truth. Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, but only if we don't lose ourselves trying to fix what broke us." That's the danger of staying too close. You get entangled in their stories, their moods, their distortions of what really happened, and before long, you forget who you were before the apology you never received. That's why distance matters, not as punishment, but as remembrance. A return to the clarity you had before you started carrying someone else's confusion. This doesn't mean shutting everyone out. It means recognizing who makes you forget your peace and choosing to stop handing them access to it. It means realizing that your energy is a currency, and some people spend it recklessly. They take and take and take, and then get angry when the supply runs out. But you're not a resource for the emotionally reckless. You're a human being with limits, boundaries, and depth, and distance is how you protect that. There's a strange truth about detachment. The quieter you become, the louder their conscience grows when you stop chasing closure. They start looking for it when you stop arguing. They start replaying everything you never said, and what they imagine will often cut deeper than anything you could have verbalized, because you didn't need to scream. You didn't need to explain, you just stopped showing up, and in that absence a lesson takes root, one that no conversation could have planted. Seneca reminded us, "He who is everywhere is nowhere," and that includes emotionally. You don't owe everyone full access to your mind, your time, your heart. If someone constantly tests your patience, withdraw your presence. If someone manipulates your kindness, stop explaining your silence. Let them learn. Let them feel what it's like to talk to an echo. Because when your distance becomes your boundary, people either rise to meet your peace or fade into their own chaos. And it will be tempting to fill the silence to explain why you pulled away, to write the letter you'll never send, but part of psychological strength is restraint. Knowing that clarity doesn't always require conversation. Sometimes it requires letting people sit in the space they created without rescuing them, without apologizing for the distance, without shrinking. Just to keep the connection alive, there is power in being the person who can walk away without drama. The person who chooses peace over performance. The person who stops giving chances. Just because someone asks with the right tone. You're not hard. You're not cruel. You're just finished entertaining versions of love or friendship that cost you your sanity. And when you embody that truth, something shifts in the air around you. People feel it. They don't know what changed, but they know they can't reach you in the same way anymore, and that unsettles them more than any confrontation ever could, because you didn't leave loudly, you didn't attack. You simply stopped participating, and that quiet retreat echoes longer than one. So zero accusations. It says, I no longer belong here, I no longer fit where I have to fight for the bare minimum. I am choosing to be where peace doesn't cost me my identity. Let others fill the silence with stories. Let them assume, interpret, rewrite. It doesn't matter, you've stepped out of the narrative. You've stopped trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. And in doing so, you reclaim something rare, space to grow, to heal, to exist without being stretched, questioned, or diminished. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply not show up to the chaos you were invited to. Not out of weakness, but because your peace has become too valuable to trade for noise. Walk away, not to hurt them, but to heal you. Because the more you honor your silence, the louder your presence becomes in their memory. If this spoke to something in you, there's another video waiting that will take you even deeper. It's on the screen now. Watch it next, and thank you for being a part of the Stoic Tide.